We see them everywhere, right? Those vacant properties, kind of like ghosts of what a neighborhood used to be.
Mm.
But what if, instead of just seeing blight, we saw potential?
Mhm.
That's what we're diving into today. Baltimore's big swing at tackling urban decay, their Vacants to Value initiative.
Vacants to value.
And this isn't just about, making cities look pretty for a postcard. This is about the very real impact those abandoned buildings have on the people living amongst them.
Right.
We're talking increased asthma rates for kids, even links to heart disease, all because of the stress and hazards that come with living in a community, grappling with all these empty properties.
Yeah, it's often overlooked, isn't it? We hear about property values, crime, those sorts of things.
Right.
But the research you shared really gets into the human cost of all this.
Exactly. And that's what got me how Baltimore went beyond just, the wrecking ball.
Mm-hmm.
They tried something different with
Right.
this Vacants to Value thing. VDV, we'll call it for sure.
V2V, got it.
So they kicked this off back in 2010. And the heart of it was, instead of just tearing down these buildings, why not transform them, right?
Interesting.
Homes for families, spaces for businesses, even like green spaces.
Make them assets.
Exactly.
Good.
Instead of
Eyesores.
eyesores, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where things get interesting. They didn't just come in swinging with a sledgehammer at every vacant place. It was more nuanced, recognizing it's not that simple.
Well, right, because how do you tackle something so widespread? Where do you even begin?
Data. That's where they started. They mapped the entire city, looking at market stuff, what's nearby that people need, even how strong the community groups were already.
Wow. So they were strategic, like a doctor figuring out the diagnosis before just throwing any treatment at it.
Exactly. And through that, they found these areas they called community development clusters, CD clusters,
Easy clusters, all right.
hit hard by the vacant properties, but with potential. They saw a chance for a comeback in those places.
So it's like picking their battles, in a way? Yeah, you could say that. Focus on where you can make the biggest difference.
But it wasn't just like, all right, this neighborhood, you're it, and that was that, right? They had this whole game plan to actually make it happen.
Absolutely. And one of the most interesting parts, I think, was how they dealt with, all the rules and regulations, the code enforcement part of it.
Oh, right, because that can be such a mess.
A total mess. Vacant properties, you often run into tangled ownership. Holding people accountable is hard. So they tried to streamline all that, cut through the red tape so they could either get those properties back to being useful or take them over if they had to and actually redevelop them.
So it's like they realized it's not just about the buildings themselves, it's the whole system around them. Got to fix that too.
Exactly. Had to make the system work for them, not against them.
But you can't just enforce people into revitalizing an area, can you? I mean, they had to get folks to actually want to be there, right?
Exactly. And that's where those home buying incentives come in, make it attractive financially,
Right. So you're making it easier to deal with the problem properties, and you're encouraging people to actually put down roots.
Yeah.
It's a
It's
two-pronged.
two-pronged attack, yeah.
But here's the thing I found really smart. They knew that not all these CD clusters were the same.
Oh, of course. Yeah, yeah.
Needed different approaches. It's like that saying, you've seen one, you've seen them all. Well, not in this case.
Not at all.
So how did they?
Well, that's where it goes beyond just the physical stuff, the bricks and mortar. They factored in the social dimensions.
Okay, now break that down. Social dimensions, what does that even mean?
Think about what makes a community more than just buildings.
Okay, yeah.
Strong relationships between neighbors, active resident groups, trust in their leadership, all those things, they argued, just as vital as the physical stuff when you're trying to make a lasting change.
So new windows are great and all, but it's got to go deeper than that.
Absolutely. It's about fostering that sense of community, right? Like a shared investment in where they live.
Yeah, like revitalization shouldn't be something happening to you, but with you.
100%. And to see how this actually played out, they looked at 3 totally different CD clusters, 3 distinct stories.
All right, so let's talk about these neighborhoods because now I'm hooked. What were they? What made them unique?
So the report dives into 3 CD clusters: Park Heights, Eager Street Commons, and Greenmount West. Each one, you could say, is like its own path within this V2V experiment. Different challenges, different opportunities.
Okay, let's start with Park Heights. What made them stand out as a case study?
Park Heights, they were a tough one for V2V. It's a big neighborhood, and they were dealing with some really deep-rooted stuff that goes way beyond just some vacant buildings.
This is not just a fresh coat of paint kind of fix.
Right. We're talking decades of disinvestment, poverty, crime, all tangled together. And the report argues That creates a really, really tough environment for this kind of revitalization to work.
It's like, I don't know, trying to plant a garden in soil that's no good.
Yeah.
Might get a few things to sprout, but
I like that. That's a good way to put it. Because without fixing the soil itself,
it's not going to thrive.
exactly. And the report's saying those underlying issues, that bad soil, it held VDV back.
Interesting. And was it just the scale of those issues, or were there other things at play too?
Well, they pointed to what they called weak social infrastructure in Park Heights.
Right, right. We touched on social infrastructure earlier.
Yeah.
Remind me what that looks like in a neighborhood, or doesn't look like, I guess, in this case.
Yeah, so in Park Heights, they were missing that strong network, those resident associations, community centers, even just neighbors knowing each other, helping each other out, the kind of stuff that knits a community together.
It gives them a voice.
Exactly. And without those strong social structures, it's so much harder to get that community buy-in, the leadership, that you really need to make change last.
So it's like they were trying to build a house, but the foundation
Wasn't quite there.
wasn't solid.
Yeah, and that's a key takeaway from this Park Heights case, right? Revitalizing a place has to go beyond just the buildings themselves. Got to address the social stuff, the economic stuff, all those root causes of why those buildings went vacant in the first place.
Right. It's never as simple as it seems on the surface. Okay, but let's switch gears to a more, I guess, hopeful example.
Okay.
Eager Street Commons.
Yeah, Eager Street Commons is interesting.
This was, if I'm remembering right, more of a success story.
Yeah, you could say that. It offers a more optimistic view of V2V. This neighborhood's way smaller than Park Heights, more defined, like a little pocket within a bigger area.
So smaller scale, maybe fewer of those deep-rooted problems we were just talking about.
Right. Plus, Eager Street, they were lucky, right next to some more well-off areas.
Location, location, location.
Exactly. Made it more attractive for developers, and they sort of got a benefit from the positive changes happening around them. But here's the other thing, and this was big. Eager Street did have what Park Heights didn't. That strong community already there.
Oh, so they were kind of primed for this whole community-driven revitalization thing from the get-go.
Exactly. Residents already knew each other, looked out for each other, and that made a world of difference. They got involved, spoke up about what they needed, even held the city accountable. And the report argues that active participation from residents, that was key to why Eager Street worked out so well.
So you've got this smaller, more manageable area, you've got the good location, and then that secret ingredient to strong community ties. Sounds like a recipe for success.
You could say that, yeah. It all worked together.
So that's two very different examples. We've got our last one, Greenmount West. Where did they fall on this whole spectrum?
Greenmount West is cool because they're kind of a bridge between the first two. Bigger than Eager Street, so that brought challenges. But they also had something going for them that Park Heights didn't. A really strong community organization already in place, the Central Baltimore Partnership, CBP.
Right, so they had that social infrastructure.
Bingo. And that's a major takeaway from this case study. This group, the CDP, they were instrumental, served as this link between the residents, the developers, and the city government, made sure the community had a voice.
So they weren't just along for the ride. They were actually shaping how V2V happened in their neighborhood.
Exactly. They organized resident meetings, fought for projects they knew the community needed, even helped find extra funding. They understood that this wasn't just about new buildings. It was about making sure those buildings actually benefited the folks who already live there.
So we've got these three different neighborhoods, each one kind of going through V2V their own way. But at the end of the day, this isn't just about, fancy urban planning terms. It's about how people are actually living. What'd the reports say about that, the real impact on the people in these communities?
That's where this research is really valuable, I think. It goes beyond just the usual stuff, how many buildings got fixed up, property values go up, that kind of thing.
Right, the typical metrics.
Exactly. This digs into the actual effects on people's health and well-being in these places.
Okay, so give me an example. What kind of changes did they actually see?
Remember how we talked about Eager Street Commons, that strong community they had? Well, one resident, they said before V2V, they never wanted to have people over, cookouts, that kind of thing. Because of the rats, it was so bad.
Yeah.
But after, they were so proud of their street, they even started leaving their back door open. That's how much it changed.
Wow, that's a huge difference, going from embarrassed to straight up proud of where you live.
It really is, and it shows how much these changes matter, even psychologically. But it wasn't just about things looking nicer either. People in all three neighborhoods said there was less trash, fewer pests, even felt safer.
Yeah, I mean, those things might seem small, but they add up, right?
Absolutely. It's a big improvement in your quality of life when those everyday stressors are gone.
It's like this weight gets lifted, not just off the neighborhood itself, but off the people living there too.
Yeah, for sure.
But what about the places where V2V had it tougher, like we talked about with Park Heights?
Yeah.
Did they see those same positive health outcomes?
That's where it gets complicated. Some people in Park Heights did see improvements, yeah. But
Okay.
it wasn't as consistent as those other two places, not even close.
Why do you think that was? Just the scale of the issues there or something else?
It's probably a lot of things, but the report points to that lack of strong social infrastructure again.
Right, right.
Residents felt like they were out of the loop, not really part of the decisions being made. So there was frustration, this feeling like revitalization was happening to them, not with them.
Which makes sense. If you don't feel heard, it's hard to buy into any change,
Yeah.
even if you see it happening.
Right, exactly. And that actually leads into a bigger issue with all this urban revitalization stuff, which is how do you do it without pushing out the people who already live there?
The gentrification problem. It's like this constant tension,
Yeah.
trying to improve a place
Without
without
making it completely unaffordable.
pushing out the people who give it its character. Yeah.
It's tough, and the report really stresses that you have to involve residents from day one.
Make them part of the process.
Exactly. So they have a say in what their community is going to become. Like in Greenmount West, they had that strong group, the CBP, fighting for what people needed. And the residents there, they were more likely to feel like they had some ownership over the changes happening.
So it circles back to that sense of agency. If you're involved, it feels different than if things are just being done to your neighborhood.
100%. And that actually connects to one of the report's big recommendations, which is doing something called a health impact assessment, an HIA, they call it.
Okay, a health impact assessment. So like a checkup, but for the neighborhood. What is that exactly?
Basically, imagine getting all the players together, city planners, developers, health experts, but most importantly, the residents themselves. Before anything's decided, they sit down and look at, okay, if we do this project, what could be the health impacts, good and bad?
So you're trying to anticipate the consequences, not just the intended ones, but those unintended ones too, right?
Exactly. Thinking about it holistically, that it's not just about the buildings, it's about a healthy community for everyone.
I like that. So, wrapping up our deep dive into Baltimore's vacants to value, what are we walking away with here? What have we learned?
I think the big thing is there's no easy answer, no one size fits all for this revitalization stuff. It takes really understanding the neighborhood, what they're dealing with, what they need. It's got to involve the community, and you got to be willing to adjust as you go.
It's about remembering there are real people living this, not just numbers on a page.
That's it. It's about creating places where everyone has a chance to do well, to really thrive.
Absolutely. Well, this has been incredibly eye-opening. Thanks so much for joining me for this deep dive.
Anytime, glad to be here.